The New York Times, basically, there was an op-ed in the New York Times, and the New York Times said, whoopsie daisy. Whoopsie daisy. You know that whole COVID thing? We may have been misled just a little bit. Just a little bit. The New York Times, they're supposed to be journalists, some of the best allegedly in the world, but we see that that's not true. We were badly misled about the event that changed our lives, according to an opinion piece, all right? So this isn't real journalism per se. This is somebody like me that opines on issues. Since scientists first began playing around with dangerous pathogens in laboratories, the world has experienced 4 or 5 pandemics, depending on how you count. One of them, the 1977 Russian flu, was almost certainly sparked by a research mishap. Some Western scientists quickly suspected the odd virus had resided in a lab freezer for a couple of decades, but they kept mostly quiet for fear of ruffling feathers. Yet in 2020, when people started speculating that a lab accident might have been the spark that started the COVID-19 pandemic, they were treated like kooks and cranks. Many public health officials and prominent scientists dismissed the idea as a conspiracy theory, insisting that the virus had emerged from animals in a seafood market in Wuhan, China. That was the first story that I heard, frankly. And when a nonprofit called EcoHealth Alliance lost a grant because it was planning to conduct risky research into bat viruses with the Wuhan Institute of Virology, research that, if conducted with lax safety standards, could have resulted in a dangerous pathogen leaking out into the world. No fewer than 77 Nobel laureates and 31 scientific societies lined up to defend the organization. So the Wuhan research was totally safe, and the pandemic was definitely caused by natural transmission. It certainly seemed like consensus. We have since learned, however, that to promote the appearance of consensus, some officials and scientists hid or understated crucial facts, misled at least one reporter, orchestrated campaigns of supposedly independent voices, and even compared notes about how to hide their communications in order to keep the public from hearing the whole story. And as for that Wuhan laboratories research, the details that have since emerged show the safety precautions may have been terrifyingly lax. So for 5 years after the onset of the COVID pandemic, it's tempting to think of all of that as ancient history. Speaking of COVID, we learned our lesson about lab safety and about the need to be straight with the public, and now we can move on to new crises like measles or the evolving bird flu. Right? Wrong. If anyone needs convincing that the next pandemic is only an accident away, check out a recent paper in Cell, a prestigious scientific journal. Researchers, many of whom work or have worked at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, in parentheses, yes, the same institution, describe taking samples of viruses found in bats, yes, the same animal, and experimenting to see if they could infect human cells and pose a pandemic risk. Guys, I feel like I don't necessarily need to go on when it comes to this column. I think you get the gist of it. This is a New York Times op-ed opinion writer, so kudos to her for writing the column. But this is an indictment overall on the New York Times. This column, frankly, could have been written 5 years ago. Easily. Well, Carl, I mean, come on, Carl. How do you know? I wrote one similar to this 5 years ago. I mean, not as wordy, not as academic. I just used common sense. I looked at what they were doing to Trump at the time, and I just said something isn't right about this. And the reason why I bring this up is it's because it's important to realize that there are people that are plotting to destroy the United States of America. Whether it's this judge, I called his name Bozo yesterday, and then I heard the adversaries later, and they were already calling him Bozo, so I want to get away from that. I thought I had something original. I don't like stealing people's stuff. All right. So anyway, whether it's these judges, whether it's the DNC as it exists today, since it's been co-opted by the radical left. We have adversaries, and sadly, Trump was right. Unfortunately, he was right when he called out fake media, when he called out fake news. There's people that are out there that want to spread propaganda. These people, they could have done, if the New York Times had done their jobs, I believe there would be far fewer Americans that would have died of COVID. if they would have done research, if they would have been ambitious and asked questions, perhaps they would have arrived at the conclusion that, there were some therapeutics that could have worked instead of what we were using, things that could have worked better, where perhaps we could have saved lives, perhaps people could have attended the funerals of their dead spouses that they were forbade from going to because it was all a hoax. The lies, the masks were a hoax. Those never worked. I mean, that's why surgical doctors use them, so they won't spread any of their bodily fluids onto patients that they're having surgeries on. They're not good enough to stop airborne viruses. Even the N95. I'm sorry, you can wear an N95 mask all day freaking long. Somebody with a virus sneezes around you, it's gonna hit your skin. It's a fraud. And these people knew it all along. So this is an indictment on the New York Times. This is what you have to understand. Not all media is media. This is why you tune in to places like the Salem Radio Network, like the Salem Media Group, like Salem News Channel, because it's opinion. It's our opinion, but we're also going to give you the news, and we're not going to lie to you and pretend like we don't have a position. Agree or disagree. So I say, frankly, I hope the New York Times goes bankrupt. I don't give a flip if I ever read them again. I think that paper is a complete and utter disgrace. I think these mainstream media outlets are a complete and utter disgrace. They have a job to be journalists, and they haven't done it. And the New York Times, 5 years later, comes out, oops, screw you, New York Times. Hey guys, click here to subscribe to the Carl Jackson Show YouTube channel for all of my commentary and latest political analysis. Do not miss an episode. The Carl Jackson Show on YouTube. Subscribe now.